The healing of America starts with you. And we're going to talk about the UN, the North Cascades International Ecosystem Park, which you've been reading a little bit about in the paper, but not getting the truth about it. We understand they're already tearing the roads up in the Darrington area, and there'll be films of this hopefully next week. But this is an interview of 4 different people that seem to know what's going on up in the Darrington area and clear across this whole ecosystem park that the UN and the One World banksters are planning on getting their hooks on us before the entire collapse of our monetary system. It's wake-up time, and I hope you people will be real serious when you're watching this and what we can do to stop it.
There is several laws, the International Biodiversity Law, the Endangered Species Law, the Marine Mammals Act. Several of these is where the whole ecosystem management is getting their direction. They're saying these laws that are already on the books are giving them the authority to go after ecosystem management.
And these laws were passed by our Congress?
Yes, they were.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about what kind of an impact this is going to have on our local economies?
It has already had a major impact. A lot of our businesses have closed up. I would say probably 80% of our loggers in our small timber town are out of work. As far as turning to tourism and recreation, the whole plan means no people. So even if we were to bring people into the area to recreate on our forest, the Forest Service is going to do everything to keep them out, like digging up roads with 4-foot deep water bars every few hundred feet. It really is having a devastating impact on our towns because it's already been proven that you cannot turn to tourism and recreation as your only source of income.
Well, this is surely going to be devastating. I've heard they've already closed down a lot of the roads in the area. How are they doing this?
They are doing it under the guise of watershed management, and they're coming in and saying, we need to close up these roads to protect the watershed. And this is how Congress has appropriated the money. They've convinced the folks back east that these roads are really putting siltation into the salmon streams. But in actuality, they're going in and digging up these roads in September and October right now, exposing thousands and thousands of yards of raw dirt in these watersheds right before our heavy rains here in the Pacific Northwest. And they are really doing road building in reverse, and they are doing more environmental damage than if they left these roads alone. Most of these roads are already overgrown. The root system, the trees have already been established, and there is more siltation coming out of the Sewaddle Chocolate Glacier, which collapsed a year ago, going into the Skagit River in one day than all of these roads put together in 1 year. So the only thing that we can figure out is because when they dig up a road with these 4-foot deep tank traps, water bars, you cannot walk up them, ride a bike, ride a horse, or anything else. They're just making it so you are not going to want to walk up these roads. Do not enter. They're really discouraging people from entering these areas once a road is dug up under watershed management.
Now, which government agencies have been involved in this?
The Forest Service, the Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, the state Fish and Wildlife, the tribes, Department of Defense. I haven't figured that one out yet. Several government agencies and other boards, like the Biological Diversity Board that Congress established. It's very top-heavy in federal agencies.
Well, what can people do to fight this?
People, number one, need to be informed. They need to go to their local Forest Service. They need to get a list of roads that are being dug up in their area. They need to become familiar with what's going on in their backyard. They need to write to their congressman. They need to, both on a state and federal level. They need to write to the newspapers, letter to the editor. They need to join other groups as far as telephone trees, so they can be accessed when it's time to call Congress if there's a bill that we need to kill in Congress, that we can quickly reach everyone to get something stopped when it's on the legislative floor. These are the kinds of things that we need to be doing.
How much time do we have on this?
Not very much time. The end days are here. They're quickly already, I talked to the Forest Service yesterday, they're already choosing their team watershed management. The Federal Advisory Committee, the provincial team, is meeting in October. They're going to have their training sessions for those that are on the committee. It's coming. Federal government, I understand, has already appropriated millions of dollars to dig up more of these roads. It's already coming down the line. We need to get it stopped, and we need to do it now.
Are you aware of the actual date for completion when this park will be up and running?
Actually, as far as the park is concerned, is really a moot point, because what Option 9 does, it's doing everything. When Option 9 is done and they get the roads dug up, all they're going to have to do is draw a line around it and call it a park, because the wilderness will have already been established.
Well, thank you, Heidi, for a very good interview. When we think about what might be happening out in those mountains that we believe belong to our children and our grandchildren, part of the inheritance in the American dream is the lands of America. We think about those wilderness mountains. They belong to us. They don't belong to an international group, which is the direction that things are headed. When we look at the boundaries that have been described during the last interview, we find out that there's cities, there's towns, there's ranches, there's farms. That area is populated. And according to the plan, those people will be moved. What happened to property rights? What happened to our constitutional rights to own our property, and to think that we have a federal government that is ready to take our lands and give them to an international group or a foreign government? It's unbelievable. And it raises that tremendous constitutional question, which will be covered in our next interview.
And I'm here with David Montgomery, a former congressional candidate from the 2nd District. And this park poses some questions in our minds about the Constitution. And I would like, David, could you address that? How constitutional is the federal government coming in and taking Washington state lands for an international park?
Yeah, well, briefly, there is an attempt by the federal government to impose its will on a large region of the state. But I think there's also, I should mention too, that there's a larger context to this question as to whether the government will ultimately control America, or whether the U.S. citizens are the ultimate authority in our country. And this land use question of the federal government coming in and designating a large area, which would go from I-90 all the way up to the Canadian border and into Canada, and consume all of Whatcom County, all of Skagit County, 2/3 of Snohomish County, and 1/3 of King County, and then all of those counties on the east side of the Cascade, whether those lands can be designated by the federal government through a treaty arrangement. This is going to be established by a treaty between the United States and Canada to control the properties in this area. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that live in this area. They're attempting to establish rules in this area that would limit mining, logging, grazing animals, and also they want to introduce certain endangered species like grizzly bears and wolves into this area. And I think the motive for introducing these endangered species is to attempt to drive people out of these areas. And so there's a movement here, I think, in these counties and in this area to reestablish our rights. Another general problem with this proposal is that our government and the establishment of this international park and ecosystem, which will create an agency that will be from the international realm, the United Nations, or a joint agency from Canada and the United States, will transfer your private property rights to that agency. Now, this is a violation of the Constitution, And federal courts have said that it is illegal for the national government to write a treaty that would move your constitutional rights away from you by treaty. And the reason for this is that the Constitution is the supreme law of our land, and a treaty cannot violate that. But this establishment or attempt to establish this international park and ecosystem is doing just that. It's transferring your private property rights into the international realm, which will make it nearly impossible for you to exert any rights whatsoever in the area of your private property rights.
Now, under our Constitution currently, who actually owns these lands?
Well, there's a number of lands that are designated as federal lands right now in our state. Now, some people are questioning whether those lands were properly transferred to federal control. There's a Judge Isley from Oregon who says that the federal government, in fact, did not pay for these lands in our state, and these lands that are called federal lands today were established by an agreement between the state and the federal government when the states were brought into the Union. He maintains that the federal government, because of that, doesn't have a piece of paper that shows legal title to those particular lands. But this proposal for an international park and ecosystem, the ecosystem goes beyond those federal lands. It goes into the state lands, and it goes into private property. The vast majority of this area, or over half of it, is in private property. And when I say they are going to attempt to move the control of your private property to the international realm. And they do not have, in my opinion, they're doing this for the environment. But now, the environment, control of the environment is not a constitutional power of the U.S. government. The government is limited to 22 powers. And what the government has done to try to get into this area is that one of the powers the national government is for, they call the general welfare of our country. And they have included moved state powers like welfare and health care and the environment under their control under this provision of the Constitution, which is, in my opinion, a violation of the Constitution, because the original idea under the 10th Amendment was a clear separation between the powers of the national government and the powers to the people and the states. And the powers to the national government were explicitly stated in the U.S. Constitution, and the powers, all other powers, were left to the people and to the states.
Since this is so blatantly unconstitutional, and I have, for example, a letter from Governor Lowry stating that he thinks this international park is a good idea, how are they getting away with this?
Well, they being the people who are liberals who have worked in the environmental movement and have worked for years on these ideas of transferring, what they like to do is transfer the control of private property to government control. And I say it's been the fact that we have not been aware of what has actually been going on, and that we are in the process of becoming aware of what is going on and why it is violating our rights, the threat that it posed to our rights. We can, I think, in court challenge these things, and also on the political realm challenge. We should be concerned about who we are electing to office. Do they stand for our constitutional rights? Do they stand for not only the U.S. Constitution, but the state constitution and the laws that are already in place? Many of these laws do protect our rights, but we have to have elected officials who are willing to implement the laws and protect our rights. And that, I think, we are at a turning point, and this coming election in November, I think it's going to be one of the major turning points on this movement, whether our rights are going to be defended or whether we're going to lose our rights.
Well, I thank you very much, David, for sharing with us. This is Heidi Harding with the Constitution and Current Events.
Okay. David Montgomery gave us a pretty good outline on what's going on as far as what's happening legally. He talked about the 10th Amendment resolution, about the possibility of restoring states' rights to the states. They certainly don't belong to the federal government, but the federal government has gotten to be more like the Soviet government every day. They want to get out, seize things, run everything. David brought up the fact that not only these things are definitely illegal, but we can do something about it. His points were made. We can challenge these things in the Supreme Court. The problem being is it seems like our Supreme Court is ruling not for the people anymore, but for the government. Voting time is coming up. In November, we have the opportunity to vote for candidates that will make a stand. It's hard to find a candidate that will really make a stand, a constitutional stand, in the face of all the things that are happening today. This program that's going on out here in the mountains, where they're making this international park, they're using the ecosystem or nature. They're using the idea of protecting nature for the criteria or the rationale for what they're doing. This is based on something that it's called the UN Biodiversity Treaty, and it's in the Senate right now. And I've read it, and the whole thing is putting it right down to the point of putting lands under international control, under the UN. Like, we can't take care of our own land. We must put them under UN control. This raises a lot of questions in my mind, as I'm sure it does in your mind. The amazing thing is, this all started back in 1993 when President Clinton, Vice President Gore, and Secretary Babbitt came out here and talked about the timber and protecting the old growth forests and so forth. And they set up something that was called Option 9. And Option 9 is a presidential directive that they are using now to go out and actually close these roads, destroy everything out there, all the infrastructure that we have. It's hard to conceive in my mind what they are doing. In some of the literature, in some of the things that the government has put out, especially in the Forest Service, they speak of people being, you and I, as being biological resources. We're not people. We are biological resources. It reminded me very much of a movie I'd seen called Schindler's List, where there were a group of people that had no meaning whatsoever. They were in the way. In that particular time, it was the Jews. But they were destroyed. They didn't mean anything. They were biological resources to be used as slaves, and when they were no longer used, to be destroyed. And I just cannot imagine that our government can refer to us as biological resources. Another term they use is alien species. An alien species sounds like we're talking about another planet, right? Well, what they're talking about is things like chickens, cows, horses, all of those things that we use for food and use it to raise our food supply. Those are alien species now. They have taken the idea of protecting nature completely too far. We as human beings only count as one count among all the species. A grizzly bear, a wolf, a rat is just as important as you and I. In fact, you probably heard recently in the news that a man accidentally killed a certain kind of rat and they took his property. Other men have been threatened with prison because they killed something, even unknowingly. And it's amazing. You can kill a person and get away with it. But if you go out and kill one of these animals in one of these reserves, you are in deep trouble. So what we've got to do today is get things turned back around. But right now we want to have a first-hand report about what's happening up there in those mountains.
Vince, and I'm here with Dick Goebel from United We Stand America, and we're just finding out a little more about what's going on locally in regards to this international park up here. Can you tell us a little bit about what they're doing to some of the roads out here beyond Arlington?
Well, the Forest Service is going to close all the roads down here. They have 15 pages of roads that will be closed, and they're taking culverts, all access away from these. The only way access in will be walking. On Dave Brooks' show, we had a call in from Search and Rescue, a gal that works for them, and said if you get in trouble in the state parks, you may not make it because of the fact they can't get any vehicles in. If they can get a helicopter in and there's room for landing, they will get you out that way. Otherwise, you could die before you get help on the outside. The roads that are paved, and I have seen the prints on these, they will be 4 foot deep, 4 foot wide, and shaved, tapered at 12 feet at the top. No vehicles will go through. Everything be walking through these cuts in the surface. My neighbor is one who is in there. He has a contract for taking the roads out. I have spoken with him this last week, and he has stated to me that he has seen trees along there that are worth $10,000 a piece. He's a logger. And they will never be taken out of our forests. And part of that has a lot to do with our schools in this state because, as you know, they are funded by our forest products, and they're taking our forest products away. In Arlington here alone, I just came from a meeting that they're talking from $64 to $67 million school bond. And this is for the next 10-year program. Well, you stop and think that we have 3 things in this state, and that's apples, and we got Boeing, and we have forestry. Forestry, we know, is pretty well being taken out. Now, shutting our national forest down, there'll be no more logging. Boeing has made it apparent that was stated by Frank Schranz Friday morning on the news that Boeing will be competing outside of Everett for location. And it's a known fact, and people in the office in Boeing, that they are looking for a place outside the state of Washington, which could be China or Mexico. So what does that leave us but apples to pick? And we can't pay for bonds. We can't pay for anything in this state. We lose our national forests. And we have confirmation from Brazil that the same thing happened there 2 years ago. They had a national deficit that was very high. They couldn't pay it. So what happened, our world bankers came in and they took control. And we feel this is the same thing that's happening with our national parks right here. I've also heard that the next one will go down is the redwoods in California. Last week it was announced by the federal government on the news that 6.7 million acres in California, all parks, are going into this Federal Reserve, and one of them I know, Salton Sea, is very heavily used. Well, they use the excuse that they don't have the money to man the roads and the personnel, but this is only a smokescreen because what they're really doing, we can't pay our deficit. Nobody hears about it anymore. They haven't mentioned we got to pay it back because there's no money to pay it back. They've made it so high now that there's just no funds there. So the next thing, it's natural, do you come in and get collateral?
Sounds like it's really going to ruin our economy.
It's going to ruin everybody.
And can you give me an example of the kind of cost it takes to come in and totally ruin these roads?
I have no cost on it per se. This was handed out in 4 different contracts. My neighbor, like I say, is one, and he told me that Summit Timber was the biggest because they have more manpower and more dozers and equipment to do this. And then there's 2 other small outfits besides him that are taking the roads out. But you just stop and think, it takes more money to cut the roads out. Some of these culverts, he said, are 20 foot deep, and they're just tearing them out. It takes more money to do that than it does to fix that hole in the road. So,
can you tell me how all this fits in with the broader scheme of the United Nations and their plan for this area?
Well, at the symposium they had 4 weeks this coming Sunday in Seattle. It was 4 weeks ago. They had a map, and we had a call on this, that it was the map of Washington, and it showed the North Cascades and the Olympics all in black, and it said UN territory. So that was fitting the pieces together. It's very obvious what's going down here. we can't pay the deficit, so they're going to take all our natural resources. There are 5 farms between here and Omak along the Canadian border that have been not sold yet, but they've been told by the federal government that they no longer can pass them down from family to family. When they're ready to leave, the government will give them what their land is worth, and they can no longer farm there. It's a very sad situation that we're coming to.
Yes, it is. This is very disturbing. Can you tell me what people can do and what people are doing currently to stop this?
Well, we've got to get more people involved. We have several militias that are forming, I've seen in the paper. Of course, Janet Reno, our state hasn't been put on the list, but it's only a matter of time. She has 5 other states that they have militias, and she's ordered her stormtroopers to go in and find out what's going on and shut them down. I'm going to be leaving this area, so I'm setting this one up here. It's an awareness group, and I don't want to get into explaining how it's going to work, but people will be notified, and they will have a general meeting, and we're going to make people alert what they can do to arm themselves, because we don't have a government for the people or by the people. We have a government against the people, and it's got to stop.
Yes, I'm glad to hear that there are people that are doing something to stop this. And I thank you very much, Dick.
Okay.
This is Heidi Harding with the Constitution and Current Events.
Well, that was very interesting. Did you hear Dick's remarks about Boeing? This is why we named the program The Destruction of Washington State. For if Boeing is gone, what happens to Washington State? What happens to our livelihood? It is really far deeper. The problem we're facing today is far deeper than just losing our land. It's going to be lose our livelihood. Then Dick spoke of what happened in Brazil. He talked about how Brazil's national debt was so great, and that eventually the IMF stepped in, and they actually took a great amount of the land, the natural resources of Brazil. And he classed it with it's sort of the writing on the wall of what's happening to us, because our national debt is so high. Then he spoke of that symposium where they had the maps. And the maps not only included the North Cascades area, it also included the Olympic forests. Is it going to be that most of our natural resources, not only on this side of the Puget Sound, but on the other side, is going to be taken from us? And he said that all of these things that they talked about, nature and the ecosystem and all of this big thing about protecting the watersheds and so forth, are just a smoke screen. They're literally just a smoke screen. For if it did say on those maps that these areas in the North Cascades or the mountains out here and over in the Olympics, if they are going to belong to the United Nations, it really leads our thinking, because the United Nations has something called the IMF or the World Bank. These are a monopoly of world banks. Not all of them. There's a few American banks, but most of them are foreign, like German banks and English banks and so forth. We're actually looking at an international cartel of foreigners who are going to possess our lands in this country. But we can say, well, how? How is it all coming about? Well, Dick brought out the fact of the debt. Now, these same banks that make up the IMF and the World Bank and so forth are the same ones that make up what is called the Federal Reserve, the private corporation that we have in America, the Federal Reserve, that has designed a system and lobbied and put that system into effect early in this century that brought us to the point today where we have a national debt that we should not have. We have a national debt that if it pleases them, they will take our lands just as they took the lands of Brazil. They tried a similar thing recently in Venezuela. Only President Caldera stepped in. He was elected by the people, and he stepped in and said this: "You are not going to steal our land so cheap." They wanted to step in and take all of their oil for payment on this reserve. He says no. He went in and looked at their central banking system and their banks, which is like our Federal Reserve. He opened up the books and he found enough fraud in there that they are putting a great number of those men in prison. The very rich and elite of Venezuela that were playing in the same kind of game, they're putting in prison today. And Venezuela may be poor, but they still have their land. And that's what we want to do. We want to keep our land. Now, our next interview is with a man that has a very, very fine insight of what's happening. He is a scholar. I think you'll be very interested in hearing him.
I am talking today with Don Kehoe, who is a speaker here. Don, why don't you start out by telling us what they're actually calling this park and where the boundaries are?
Well, the park is called the International Ecosystem Park, North Cascades International Ecosystem Park. And the boundaries, it includes almost 11.5 million acres in both the United States and Canada. Roughly, the boundaries run from I-90 north to the Canadian border and from Puget Sound over to the Columbia River.
And that's quite a large chunk of Washington State.
Very large.
What do they plan on doing with all this land?
This is an ecosystem, as they call it. What they plan on doing is closing this land down to return to its native state, make it partly wildlands and among an ecosystem border, which will include removing a great deal of the population that currently exists there.
What do the people who currently own land here, what are they going to do with these people?
That's a good question. There's been studies and articles reporting that with biodiversity parks, you basically have to move the people out. A lot of this area's economy is being shut down, has been shut down, and is continuing to be shut down as we speak. We're talking about the fishing industry, we're talking about the lumber and milling industries, we're talking about the mining and mineral extraction. The dairy farmers in this area are being forced to move to Idaho because of environmental regulations, making it impossible to earn a living in the west side next to Puget Sound.
It almost sounds like they're trying to purposefully shut down our economy. What is the broader goal of this type of park?
The broader goal, there's several broader goals. One broader goal is this will become a preserve for the elite of the world to build and live in, and will be excluding the common folks. This area is destined for electronic fortifications and control. The broader scope beyond that is that we're looking at a preserve of the elite that will be running a one world government and a new world order.
What will the rest of us be doing?
Actually, in this part of the country, this is the crown jewel of property management, in the sense that this park will be a preserve. Beyond that will be buffer zones, human buffer zones, leading up to which will have very limited human inhabitation and development, leading up to core cities where the concept being promoted in Seattle and this area is high urban village concept in the terms of high density. And you'll have high rises in corridors of urban villages. And most of the people will be required to live in those corridors.
What will those people do for a living?
They've never explained that.
Yes, I don't see what will be left for them to do. Who is responsible for protecting these lands, on the borders of this international park, and how are they doing that, or how will they do that?
Well, if you get into the actual conception and putting together this park, basically what it calls for is the elimination of borders. In fact, there was a conference at the University of Washington last spring in 1994, and the title of the conference and the title of the map promoting this park is Nature Has No Borders. And so they're going to be eliminating the borders, and if you eliminate the borders, you're also eliminating the nation state, and you're eliminating nationalism. And you cannot have a one world government in a new world order with the continued existence of a free and democratic republic of the United States. So the bottom line is to eliminate the republic of the United States.
Okay, and how do they protect who oversees these areas? I think in your speech you mentioned maybe that the CIA was going to be involved in some surveillance type of activities.
Right now in Mount Vernon, a former CIA director by the name of Robert Gates has moved into the area, and he moved on to a lake about 10 miles southeast of Mount Vernon. His home is, according to the article, electronically fortified. There's also been reports from other individuals that have gone up to cabins in the mountains and such, whereas after they've reached their cabins, Armed Force Service personnel show up and ask them what they're doing there. And they say, well, this is my land. The question is, what are you doing here? And how did you know I was here? And the Forest Service personnel said, we tracked you by satellite, we didn't know who you were, and we needed to identify you.
This is certainly should be a concern to all of us who live in this area. Can you tell us a little bit about the Growth Management Act and how that fits into the scheme?
The Growth Management Act is what it's doing, and this is a Washington State Act, as you know, is creating the human buffer zones of very limited development outside of high-density areas. And so it's a three-stage process: the high-density area, the buffer zone, and then the crown jewel, which will be out of bounds for most former citizens of the area.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there other parks being targeted in the United States?
From what I've heard and understand in the reports I've seen, there are a number of parks that are going under some sort of United Nations biodiversity definition. And I think this is going to be this movement will continue to be growing, because obviously the Growth Management Act is a population control effort. You cannot do this against the Republic of the United States without controlling the population.
Well, this certainly seems like a clear violation of our constitutional rights. What is being done to stop this?
Well, as you saw, there's the beginning of public meetings, so folks can learn about what the actual plan here is in effect. This has nothing to do with environment and ecology. This has to do with population control and one world government and a new world order.
Okay, and what would you tell our viewers as far as things that they can do to become involved in this?
I would say that shut off the television set, which may not be a good point in your favor here, but at least change channels and have to become knowledgeable of what's going on in this country. And if you think it's too far out to be true of what you might read or what you might hear, I've been doing research specifically in this area for the last 4 years, heavy research. I'm constantly amazed in historical investigations what I found in the history of what's happened in the history of this country, and nothing surprises me anymore. In fact, I'm very careful to fully document most everything that I say, because I'm held accountable in terms of writing and in speaking. And the worst fears are becoming more and more knowledgeable to more and more people, there is a definite assault on the Republic of the United States taking place as we speak.
There certainly is, and we might want to tell our viewers that Don publishes a journal called Blowing in the Wind, and in case you would like to write for more information, the address is 19624 Highway 2, number 318. That's in Monroe, Washington, and the zip code is 98272. Thank you very much, Don, for your time.
Thank you.
This is Heidi Harding with Constitution and Current Events.
Well, Don Kehoe certainly summed it up when he put in there a lot of things that we should think of in terms of what may really be going on, what are the real purposes and goals behind this. I have in my hand a copy of a letter that was written to the office of the governor here in the state of Washington, or from him, to Dale A. Crane, the National Parks and Conservation Association. And I want to quote from this letter that says, "Dear Mr. Crane, thank you for information about the effort of the National Parks and Conservation Association and the Cascades International Alliance to establish a Cascades International Park. Establishing such a park is an excellent idea." Now, can anyone tell me why the governor, who is to look after the welfare of this nation or this state and its citizens, believes it's a good idea to have an international park? A park that's going to give away 1/3 of the property of the state of Washington. It is beyond me. And then to think of why the purpose of this happening. Don Kehoe, who's done a lot of research, and he receives an awful lot of information from many different sources, has told us that this international park is essentially to become a preserve for the wealthy and elite, the leaders of the New World Order. Now, I can understand this happening because Washington State is a beautiful place. If it's true that the international bankers that we've spoken of are going to actually own this property under the auspices of the UN, then undoubtedly they're probably going to live here. It was told at one point that they actually have a name for a new community called Everest, and we have no, not Everett, but Everest, and we have no Everest, Washington, but there will be one. The plan is for one, from what I've heard. Now, it's just almost inconceivable that these things could be happening. I think of recently we've heard of urban villages, urban growth, growth management, a whole series of things have appeared in our newspaper and television lately about how to condense our cities, more people living in our cities, expanding and developing our cities, and many of the residents of cities saying, no, we don't want our cities more crowded. But evidently, the urban village and the urban growth idea is directly connected with this idea of this large wilderness area out here where no one is going to live, where we're going to have to move entire villages and towns out of those areas to turn them back to wilderness again. It goes to that term that they had for the symposium or the seminar, whatever you want to call it, when they first presented this at the University of Washington, and they said, nature has no borders. Now that sounds nice. Nature has no borders. But essentially what they're saying is that we no longer recognize the boundaries of the United States of America. They do not recognize those boundaries. They say we're going to remove those boundaries because nature flows beyond those boundaries. It's a real sad thing when we think that they're using all of these very nice sounding words like ecosystem protection, watershed protection, protecting nature, protecting all these things, but using all of these things as that smoke screen to keep us from understanding what they're really doing, and that is stealing our land. Surveillance. Don spoke of surveillance and how that there was a number of people who have went up to their property and their lands up there in the mountains, their mountain cabins. Perhaps some of you have a mountain cabin up there in that area. And not long after people had arrived there, armed government agents come knocking on their door and asking who they were. And the property owner said, well, it's my cabin. Well, who are you? What are you doing here? How did you find me? And they said, well, we just had to know who you were. We're tracking you by satellite. Now listen, friends, satellites cost a great deal of money, and a tracking system from satellites costs a great deal more money. This sounds like we're entering into something like a war. They're actually, the federal government and the powers that be are using the material, the technology and everything they use in war. They're using it on who? We, the citizens of the United States, tracking us into our own territory and then having the audacity to come in as a police state and say, what are you doing here on our own property? I wonder what happened to our Constitution. We're truly becoming a police state. Even the Dick, a while ago, talked about forming militias, and he spoke how Janet Reno, our Attorney General of the United States, has put out the word that she's going after the citizens' militia, and she is using, and he referred to it as her stormtroopers. That'll be the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco, the FBI, the CIA, all of these government entities that are supposed to protect us are now being used against us. And many of those are going to be involved in what they're doing up there right now in the North Cascades. It's an incredible situation, and one that I'm extremely angry about. In Cairo, Egypt, just last month, there was a big UN conference on population and world development. The emphasis was put on population. Before the conference even began, it was well advertised that they have a goal of reducing the Earth's population from 5.5 billion down to 2 billion. How they're going to do all of this is left hanging in the air. The idea was that they were going to do it. Certainly, if they do what they're planning to do here in the state of Washington, our population is going to be reduced here because our land is gone, our livelihood is gone. I get very discouraged when I look at all of these things that are happening, and I try to communicate it as well as I can, both in writing and in television, in whatever way that we can communicate it. But a lot of people like to refer us and say that, oh, we're conspiracy theorists. We see a conspiracy in everything. Everything is a conspiracy. Well, I want to begin by saying conspiracy defined means a plot. And it's a plot done in secret and oftentimes illegal. All right, let's describe some modern conspiracy conspirators that you might understand. One might be Hillary Clinton, and she spent millions of taxpayers' dollars having secret meetings. We can't find out what went on in these meetings with people. We cannot find out who these people were to create a plan for a national health care system, and we have never been able to find out really what that plan was. To me, she is a conspirator, and they had a conspiracy. Other conspiracies would be things like NAFTA and GATT, these great, huge agreements, international agreements. GATT, for instance, 27,000 pages. Have they told us on television all the things that are in it? Were they telling us all the time that GATT was being created, what each thing was in there? They were all done in secret. You will never see anything on our news to tell you exactly what is in there. So we find that NAFTA and GATT is a conspiracy to destroy the American worker in America. Literally, to destroy America and its workers, if we put it that way. So we see when we talk about conspiracy, there are really there. The Federal Reserve, if you go back and see how a cartel of banks met in secret, drew up plans in secret, did everything in secret and had it in and voted in, and the whole thing done before anyone knew about it. It was never advertised. The New World Order, a one world government is planned. Is this a conspiracy? Well, President Bush said Desert Storm was a major stepping stone to the New World Order. Henry Kissinger said that NAFTA was a creative stepping stone to the New World Order. Warren Christopher says we must get in line for the New World Order. The New World Order means a one world government and the end of a free and independent America. I don't need to say a whole lot more. I must say that I'm extremely angry, and I believe that everyone that hears about this, knows about it, should be angry, and we should all have one cry, and that cry should be, restore our Constitution for a free and independent America. Sounds strange when we say a free and independent America, because that's what we've had all this time, but it's leaving us. So I would ask you to get involved. There are many patriot organizations out there. There's United We Stand America. We have Washington Watch, the Better Government Bureau. There's many organizations. We've started a new one called the Community Defense Coalition. And we'd invite you to call us. Call us and let us help you get involved. But I know one thing, that if we don't do something soon, we are going to lose our Constitution. And when we lose our Constitution, we're going to be better off in the swamps of Bangladesh or the mountains of Afghanistan. Because without a Constitution, you and I are nobody other than or how much possession we have or the influence we have, but we cannot stand as free individual citizens as we do today. So join me today in saying, restore our American Constitution for a free and independent America. This is Bill Tinsley for the Constitution and Current Events, saying goodbye and thank you for watching.
We would like to keep on